I've lived on my ranch for most of my life. It wasn't just a piece of land to me, it was my history, my legacy, and my peace. My father had built this ranch with his bare hands, and when he passed it down to me, I swore I'd protect it no matter what. The land stretched wide and golden, with pastures rolling toward the horizon, horses grazing under the big Texas sky, and the sound of wind brushing through the oak trees that had been here longer than anyone in town. Life here was simple, quiet, and honest, until the day the Homeowners Association, or the so-called HOA, decided they had the right to give away my land. It all started about a year after a new development went up down the road, a neighborhood of fancy houses built by a company called Willow Estates. They were the kind of people who complained about the smell of horses or the sound of roosters in the morning. They didn't understand ranch life. I didn't mind them, though. I stayed on my side of the fence and kept to myself. But what I didn't know then was that the HOA running that shiny new neighborhood had plans to expand, and they somehow thought my ranch was part of their little community project. At first, it was just small things. I'd find HOA notices in my mailbox, rules about lawn maintenance, noise levels, even fence height restrictions. I thought it was a joke. My fence was barbed wire, built decades ago, and no one ever told me how tall my own fence should be. I tossed those letters in the trash. Then came the warnings: failure to comply will result in fines. I laughed at those too. I wasn't part of any HOA, never signed up, never agreed to their nonsense. But the tone of the letters kept changing, from warnings to threats. A few weeks later, a woman showed up at my gate in a spotless white SUV. She had sunglasses bigger than her face and a clipboard in hand. "Good morning," she called out, in that sharp, fake sweet voice people use when they're about to say something insulting. "I'm Denise, president of the Willow Estates HOA. We need to discuss your property boundaries." I wiped my hands on my jeans, I'd been fixing a water trough, and walked over to meet her. "Ma'am," I said, "this here's private property. Whatever issue you've got, I think you're at the wrong place." She smiled, tight and cold. "Actually, we're at the right place. You see, our development agreement includes an easement through this section of land." She pointed at my north field, the one where my horses grazed. "We're planning to build a walking trail and a community pond there. It's all part of the HOA's expansion plan." I stared at her, not sure I'd heard right. "You're telling me you plan to build a walking trail through my pasture?" She nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Yes, but don't worry, it won't interfere with your operations. You'll still have access. We just need to move the fence line a bit." My blood boiled. That fence had marked our land for generations. "Lady," I said slowly, "that fence isn't moving an inch. And you sure as hell aren't building anything on my property." Her smile vanished. "If you don't comply, the HOA will take appropriate measures." I laughed out loud. "You go right ahead." Then I turned and walked back toward the barn, leaving her standing there, fuming. I figured that was the end of it. Maybe she'd go home, realize her mistake, and drop the whole thing. But a few days later, I noticed something strange. New survey stakes had been hammered into the ground along my northern field, bright orange with little flags fluttering in the wind. And next to them, tire tracks. Someone had been driving in and out of my property while I was gone. I called the county office to check my land records. The clerk, a nice old guy named Pete, pulled them up. "Says here your title's clean as a whistle," he said. "Ain't no HOA easement anywhere near your property line." That's what I thought. But when I mentioned Willow Estates, Pete paused. "Wait a minute," he muttered, clicking through his computer. "Looks like someone filed an amendment, says part of your north field was donated to the HOA for community use." "Donated?" I repeated. "By who?" He hesitated. "Says here. Denise Harper, HOA president." "But you didn't sign anything, right?" "Not a damn thing." That's when it hit me, they'd forged paperwork. Someone at the HOA, probably Denise herself, had submitted false documents claiming I'd given up part of my ranch. I drove straight to the county courthouse, slammed those fake records on the desk, and demanded they be investigated. The clerk said they'd look into it, but I knew bureaucracy moved slow. In the meantime, I started seeing construction crews show up near my fence. Big machines, dump trucks, and men in neon vests were already clearing brush on what they thought was their land. I stormed out there, and one of the workers, a young guy, waved at me. "Hey man, you the ranch owner? HOA said this is community property now. We're just doing what they told us." "Yeah. Well, they told you wrong," I barked. "Get your machines off my land before I call the sheriff." He shrugged. "You'll have to talk to our project manager." Sure enough, the next day Denise was back, this time with 2 other HOA board members. They stood near the fence like they owned the place. "You're trespassing," I told them. "No, you are," Denise shot back, waving a folder full of documents. "This section now belongs to Willow Estates per recorded transfer. You can appeal it if you want, but construction begins Monday." Appeal? They'd stolen my land on paper and wanted me to appeal it. I clenched my jaw. I wasn't going to waste time arguing. Instead, I went back to my barn, sat down at my desk, and started planning. See, my father always told me, when someone tries to take what's yours, you don't yell. You act. And that's exactly what I did. That night, I walked the perimeter of my property under the moonlight, measuring every line, every post, every inch of that old barbed wire fence. The next morning, I started hauling in new supplies, steel posts, razor wire, heavy-duty locks, and thick wooden boards. I rebuilt the entire fence, taller, stronger, and impossible to climb without tearing yourself apart. I added motion lights, warning signs, and cameras. If they wanted to claim my land, they'd have to go through this wall. By the time Monday rolled around, my fence looked like something out of a fortress. The workers showed up, saw what I'd built, and hesitated. Denise showed up a few minutes later, jaw-dropping when she saw the new barrier. "This is illegal," she screamed. "You can't build that." I just smiled. "You said this isn't my land, right? Then it ain't my fence either." Her face turned red. "We'll call the sheriff." "Do it," I said, leaning on the gate. When the deputies showed up, they took one look at my deed and laughed. "Ma'am, this ranch belongs to him. You're the ones trespassing." Denise tried arguing, waving her fake papers, but the deputies didn't buy it. "You'll need to take this to court," they told her. She did, and that was the biggest mistake she ever made. Because while she was filing lawsuits, I was collecting proof, footage of the trespassing, copies of the forged signatures, even statements from the workers who admitted they were told by the HOA that the rancher agreed to donate the land. When the court date came, I walked in wearing my dusty boots and denim jacket, holding a folder thicker than her entire case. And when the judge saw the forgery, his face went pale. But that's a story for a bit later, because before that day came, the HOA decided to push me one last time. They tried something even worse, and that's when I decided to make sure Denise would regret ever touching my fence. After that first courthouse scare, I thought Denise and her HOA pack would back off, but I should have known better. Some people, especially ones with too much power and too little sense, don't quit when they're wrong, they double down. And that's exactly what she did. Within a week, I started noticing new tricks, little, sneaky acts meant to pressure me into giving up my land. It began with small annoyances. Someone started cutting my fence in the dead of night, not much, just enough to let my cattle wander out. I'd wake up before dawn to the sound of hoofbeats on gravel and find half my herd strolling down the road. I had to fix the fence almost every morning, and every time, find boot prints near the broken section, clean-soled, not rancher's boots. HOA shoes, I called them. Then came the letters. Certified mail this time, Big bold letters across the top, notice of violation. Violation of what? I wasn't part of any HOA. But they didn't care. The letter claimed my unauthorized fence structure violated community aesthetic standards, and that I owed $12,800 in fines. I nearly laughed myself out of the chair. They even had the nerve to say they'd place a lien on my property if I didn't pay within 30 days. I didn't even bother replying. Instead, I called my attorney, a good old friend named Mark Danner. He was a tall, quiet guy, used to handle oil rights and boundary disputes. When I told him what was going on, he chuckled. They can't touch you, Jake. You're outside their jurisdiction. That's what I figured, I said. But they're not getting the message. He nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time you send one they won't forget. That night, I sat on my porch, staring out at the fence line, thinking about those words. Send them a message. I didn't want trouble, I wanted peace, but when someone tries to steal your land, there comes a point when you stop defending and start teaching. So I went to work. I called in a few buddies from town, ranch hands, welders, and my cousin Ray who used to work in security installations. We spent days reinforcing the fence even more. This time I wasn't just building a wall, I was building a trap. Motion sensors, hidden cameras, and floodlights connected to alarms, all powered by a backup generator so even if they tried cutting power, the system stayed alive. Ray whistled when we finished. You're turning this place into Fort Knox, Jake. Good, I said. Let's see them trespass now. And sure enough, within a few days, the fence caught its first rat. It was around 2 a.m. when the alarm went off, a sharp, piercing buzz that yanked me out of bed. I grabbed my flashlight, my phone, and stepped out the door. The camera streamed directly to my tablet, and what I saw made my jaw tighten, 3 figures sneaking along the north pasture, cutting through the wire. One of them had a can of spray paint. Another carried bolt cutters. And the third, well, I didn't need a close-up to know that short, angry walk. Denise herself. I didn't call the sheriff. Not yet. I let them keep going. They cut through the fence, stepped in, and started hammering stakes again, trying to remark the land as theirs. That's when I hit the switch. The floodlights exploded to life, blinding them. The alarm screamed like a siren, and the camera zoomed in automatically. Denise froze, hand in midair, as my voice boomed from the loudspeaker I'd installed earlier that day. You're trespassing on private property. Step away from the fence. They panicked. One of the guys tripped over a coil of wire and landed face first in the dirt. Denise started shouting, "Turn it off. Turn it off," but the system wasn't hers to control. I watched them stumble back through the opening they'd made, scrambling for their SUV parked on the roadside. I called the sheriff after they left. Deputy Lawson showed up half an hour later, yawning but amused. Caught him on camera again, huh? Oh, I caught everything, I said, handing him the tablet. He whistled. That's a pretty clear shot of her face. She's cooked. He filed the report, and I thought that'd be the end. But Denise wasn't just stubborn, she was desperate. The HOA had already promised that new walking trail to the neighborhood residents, printed it in newsletters, and even collected community improvement fees from every homeowner. Backing down now would make her look like a liar. So instead of apologizing, she went on the offensive. She called a local news station, claiming I had illegally blocked public access to community land. The story aired that evening, showing footage of my fence, which she filmed from the road, with a headline that read, "Local Rancher Disrupts Community Growth." I sat there in my recliner, watching her smile for the camera, spouting lies about how I was endangering local families and refusing to cooperate with lawful HOA plans. I clenched my fists until my knuckles turned white. She was using the media to turn public opinion against me. But she made one fatal mistake, she didn't know I recorded everything. The next morning, I sent the full footage, the trespass, the cutting, the spray painting, everything, to that same news station. Along with a copy of my deed, county survey records, and the sheriff's report. By that afternoon, the story flipped like a pancake. HOA president caught trespassing and damaging private ranch property, the anchors said on air. They even played the footage of her yelling, "Turn it off," while blinding lights lit up the night. Viewers roasted her in the comments section, calling her Karen of the Year and demanding she resign. Denise went radio silent for a few days after that. But the HOA board, oh, they were furious. Not at her, at me. I'd embarrassed them, and in their world, reputation mattered more than law. So they launched a lawsuit. A big one. Claimed defamation, obstruction of community access, violation of neighborhood ordinances, and about 20 other bogus charges. I called Mark again, and when he saw the paperwork, he laughed so hard he nearly dropped his coffee. They're suing you for defamation when you literally have them on video trespassing? Yep, I said, deadpan. He leaned back. Let's burn them in court. The trial date was set for mid-spring. Until then, the tension in town grew thick enough to choke on. HOA members drove past my ranch slow, taking pictures. Some residents from Willow Estate sent hate mail, saying I was ruining property values. Others secretly sent messages of support, even a few who said they were sick of Denise's power games. One man, a quiet engineer named Tom, stopped by my ranch one afternoon. "I'm from Willow Estates," he said, nervously glancing around. "I thought you should know. Denise and the board are planning something big. They're holding a community cleanup event next weekend, and she told everyone to bring tools for clearing the fence area." My heart thumped. "They're gonna try to take it down again." He nodded. "She's telling people the land is theirs by law now." I shook his hand. "Thanks, Tom. I owe you one." That night, I made my move. I called Mark, told him what I'd heard, and he just said, "Document everything. Let them hang themselves." So I set up extra cameras, even drones. I wanted every second on record. The day of the cleanup, I sat quietly on my porch, sipping coffee, as a crowd of HOA volunteers gathered near the road. Families, teenagers, and a few board members, all holding gloves, shovels, and wire cutters. Denise stood in front, shouting instructions like a general preparing for battle. They started cutting through the fence again, laughing, cheering, like it was some sort of victory parade. I didn't move. I let them keep going, let them push their luck until half the fence was down. Then I called the sheriff again, and this time, I sent him live footage from my drones. By the time the deputies arrived, the HOA crowd was in the middle of tearing up posts. The cops stepped out, sirens blaring, and the look on Denise's face when she saw those flashing lights was priceless. Lawson shouted, "Everyone stop what you're doing. You're on private property." Someone in the crowd stammered, but Denise said, "She was wrong," Lawson barked. "You're all trespassing. Step back now." Within minutes, the whole scene dissolved into chaos. Volunteers scattered, some crying, others arguing. Denise tried to talk her way out again, waving papers that had already been proven fake. But this time, Lawson had backup, 2 other deputies and a county land officer who confirmed, right there on the spot, that the property was mine. They arrested her on charges of criminal trespass, property damage, and forgery pending investigation. The crowd gasped as she was handcuffed and led away. I just stood there, arms crossed, silent. Not angry. Not smug. Just, relieved. But I wasn't done yet. Because that fence she tried so hard to tear down, the one she called an eyesore, was about to become the reason her entire HOA empire collapsed. Denise's arrest should have been the end of it, but people like her never go down quietly. Even from behind bars, she was making noise, calling in favors, using HOA funds for legal defense, and spinning news stories about how I had set her up. I didn't care. The law was finally catching up, and I had proof stacked a mile high. But the deeper we dug, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was part of something much bigger. A week after her arrest, my lawyer Mark called me into his office. "Jake," he said, sliding a manila folder across the table, "you're gonna want to see this." Inside were financial records, court filings, and emails we'd subpoenaed from the HOA. Turns out, Denise had been using HOA funds to pay for private land surveys, permit fees, and even bribes to county inspectors. She wasn't just after my land, she was building a paper trail to claim multiple properties around the development. Mark tapped one of the pages. "Look here. They filed 3 other fake land transfers before yours, smaller lots, all rural, all adjacent to Willow Estates. Looks like they were trying to expand the HOA boundaries illegally, piece by piece." My stomach sank. So my ranch was just the big prize. He nodded grimly. "Exactly. But here's the good news, the fence footage, the fake signatures, the forged deeds, it's all enough for the DA to press full fraud charges." I leaned back, feeling the weight of it. "You think they'll shut the HOA down?" Mark smiled. "They won't have a choice." The news spread fast. By the following week, the story was everywhere: HOA land fraud scandal, local president arrested. The homeowners in Willow Estates were furious. Their property values plummeted overnight, and their association fees had vanished into Denise's expansion fund. Every day, I'd see another moving truck pulling out of the neighborhood. The once pristine gates of Willow Estates now looked like an abandoned dream. But even as Denise's empire crumbled, she still had her claws in the system. Her attorney filed countersuits, claiming I'd entrapped her and sabotaged community development. They demanded millions in damages. Mark warned me, "She's desperate. Desperate people do stupid things." He wasn't wrong. One night, about 2 weeks before the big court hearing, I noticed something strange: headlights down by the far edge of my pasture, flickering on and off. Too deliberate to be random. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight, hopped on my ATV, and rolled down the dirt trail. When I got close enough, I saw 3 men crouched near the fence, but not locals, and definitely not ranch hands. They were trying to dig under the posts, pulling out the metal stakes that anchored my boundary line. I revved the ATV engine and shouted, "Step away from that fence." The men bolted. I chased them halfway down the road before they jumped into a dark pickup and sped off. I couldn't get the plate number, but I knew they weren't acting alone. Someone sent them, and I'd bet every dollar it was Denise or someone tied to her. I called Mark again. He sighed, "They're trying to erase your physical claim to the land before the trial. If that fence disappears, they'll argue it was never officially marked." That's when I made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, I filed paperwork to register my fence as a protected boundary structure under county law, the same status used for historical fences and heritage properties. It meant no one could touch it without a permit, not even the county itself. But I didn't stop there. I also filed an emergency civil suit, not for damages, but for ownership clarification, complete with drone footage, timestamps, and surveyor certifications. It was airtight. By the time Denise's lawyers showed up to court, my fence wasn't just a wall anymore, it was a legal boundary protected by court order. When the day of the hearing arrived, the courthouse was packed. Local reporters, homeowners, ranchers, everyone wanted to see what would happen. Denise walked in looking like she hadn't slept in weeks, but her lawyers still strutted around like they had a chance. I wore my usual ranch coat and boots. I wasn't there to impress anyone. The judge, a tall man with sharp eyes named Judge Miller, took one look at the evidence and frowned. "Let me get this straight," he said. "The HOA claims ownership of this man's land based on a deed filed by a president who had no legal authority, with a signature proven to be forged. Denise's lawyer stammered, "Your Honor, we believe Mr. Carter, Rancher Carter," the judge corrected, "has entrapped my client by provoking." The judge held up his hand. "Stop. You're wasting my time." Then he turned to me. "Mr. Carter, do you have the footage you mentioned?" I nodded and passed the tablet forward. The courtroom went dead silent as the video played, Denise and her crew trespassing at 2 a.m., cutting the fence, spraying paint, then the floodlights and her shriek of, "Turn it off." The room erupted in whispers. Even the court stenographer smirked. The judge leaned back, unimpressed. "Well, Ms. Harper," he said slowly, "it appears you not only trespassed but attempted to defraud a private citizen and misuse public office to alter land records. That's not a boundary dispute. That's a felony." Denise's face went ghost white. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge shut him down. Objection overruled. "In fact, I'm ordering an immediate injunction against the HOA. Their authority over all external properties is revoked pending full investigation." When the gavel came down, it felt like thunder in my chest. I'd won, not just for me, but for every small landowner who ever got bullied by these so-called associations. But it didn't end there. After the hearing, homeowners started lining up outside the courthouse, shaking my hand, thanking me. Turns out, half of them never even wanted to be part of the HOA. Denise had strong-armed them too, hidden fees, threats of fines, even foreclosure warnings for unpaid dues. My fight had exposed everything. Within a month, Willow Estates was under full audit. The HOA board dissolved. Denise was officially charged with fraud, forgery, and misuse of funds. She faced serious prison time. But what came next, that was something I never expected. One evening, about a week before sentencing, I was out mending a fence post when a car pulled up to the gate. It was a black sedan, tinted windows, not local plates. I set my tools down, walked up, and the window rolled down. Inside sat an older man in a suit, sharp and calm. "Mr. Carter," he said, voice smooth as silk. "I represent a development firm that purchased the remaining assets of Willow Estates. We'd like to make you an offer." I frowned. "Not interested." He smiled faintly. "Hear me out. We'd like to buy your ranch, fair price, double the market value. No tricks, no HOA nonsense. You walk away with more money than you'll ever need." I took a long look at him. "You one of Denise's partners?" He chuckled softly. "She was, a little too eager. We prefer cleaner business. But her mistake doesn't change the value of that land. The community wants to rebuild. We could make it worth your while." I stepped closer to the car, leaned in just enough for him to see the dirt on my hands. "This land's not for sale," I said quietly. "Not for double. Not for triple. Not for anything. You tell your bosses that fence stays where it is." He stared at me for a moment, then smiled again, a tight, professional smile. "That's a shame, Mr. Carter. You might find that line harder to defend when progress comes knocking." He drove off, leaving a trail of dust in his wake. I stood there, watching the sun dip low over the fields, the wind whistling through the wire. Progress. That's what they always called it when they tried to take something that wasn't theirs. But I wasn't going anywhere. In fact, that encounter made me double down. I added another layer to my fence, not just for defense this time, but for memory. I carved a small wooden sign on the main gate that read, "My land. My blood. My legacy." And as I hammered it into place, I realized something. That fence had started as protection. Then it became defiance. But now, it was something more, a symbol of every inch of freedom I refused to surrender. Still, I had no idea that the fence, that simple barrier of wood, steel, and wire, would soon uncover something far darker buried beneath the surface of Willow Estates. Something Denise had never gotten the chance to finish. Something that would make progress come crashing down for good. After that meeting with the man in the black sedan, something about his tone lingered in my head. The way he said, "Progress comes knocking," wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. I could feel it. People like that didn't walk away, they regrouped, found new angles, new papers, new loopholes. So I started digging, not with a shovel, but through records, archives, and whispers around town. Mark helped me pull the property development files for Willow Estates. Most of it was routine, zoning approvals, water permits, utility contracts. But one folder caught my eye: environmental exemption requests. The company behind Willow Estates, a firm called Sandwell Development, had requested special permission to bypass environmental testing on the northern lots. Those lots bordered my ranch. The reason listed was vague: previous land usage validated. That didn't make sense. There had never been any official record of industrial use or contamination on that land. Mark frowned. That's odd. Developers usually overdo environmental reports, not skip them. Why would they need an exemption? I leaned forward. Unless they were hiding something. We requested more records, and it took a week to get them. When they arrived, the puzzle started coming together. According to old county archives, decades before Willow Estates existed, that section of land, including part of my northern pasture, had been leased to a private chemical company for waste storage. They'd buried barrels underground, supposedly sealed and forgotten after the company folded. The government had shut them down for improper disposal, but the cleanup records were missing. My pulse quickened. Denise had been desperate to claim that land, not because she wanted a walking trail, but because she needed control. She knew there was something buried there. Maybe she thought she could cover it up before anyone found out. I went straight out to the north field that evening. The grass swayed under the orange dusk light, innocent as ever. But if the records were right, something poisonous was sleeping under those roots. I grabbed a shovel and started digging near the oldest fence posts. 3 feet down, the dirt started changing, darker, wetter, oily. Then I hit something solid. When I brushed the dirt away, a rusted metal lid stared back at me. I froze. A chill crawled up my spine. I marked the spot and called the county environmental office. The inspector came out the next morning with a crew, and when they dug deeper, their expressions said it all. "Old chemical drums," one of them muttered. "At least a dozen. This is bad, real bad." They roped off the entire area and started testing the soil. A week later, the results came in: toxic contamination, severe enough to poison the groundwater. The entire northern section of Willow Estates was sitting right on top of an unreported hazardous site. Mark nearly dropped his coffee when he saw the report. "Jake, do you understand what this means? Not only were they trying to steal your land, they were trying to bury their problem under your name." My anger turned cold, focused. They wanted to make it my responsibility. If they'd gotten that deed through, I'd be the one blamed for poisoning the groundwater. He nodded grimly. That's exactly it. I could almost see Denise now, smug and calculating, thinking she'd found the perfect way to hide decades of corporate rot behind the face of a lone rancher. But she hadn't counted on the fence. The same barrier she'd fought to tear down was the one that exposed her entire scheme. The fence line, which marked the transfer, ran right through the contaminated zone. The environmental agency traced the coordinates from my fence posts and discovered that every illegal burial pit was on the land the HOA claimed to own. The headlines came fast. Toxic cover-up found beneath luxury development. Rancher's fence exposes decades-old chemical dump. People were furious. Homeowners from Willow Estates packed emergency town meetings, demanding refunds, lawsuits, and criminal charges. The development company, Sandwell, tried to deny involvement, but the records told the truth. They'd known. They'd paid off officials, skipped inspections, and used the HOA as a shield. Denise had just been their willing pawn. Within weeks, the state launched a full investigation. Bulldozers rolled in, not to build, but to dig, this time to remove the poisoned soil. Watching them tear into the earth, I felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. Relief that justice was finally being served. Heartbreak that land once full of life had been used as a dumping ground for greed. The sheriff stopped by during one of the cleanups. "You sure stirred up a storm, Jake," he said, tipping his hat. "Never seen this county this busy." "Didn't mean to," I said. "Just wanted to keep what's mine." He chuckled. "Well, looks like you did more than that. You saved half the town's water supply." That hit me harder than I expected. All this time, I'd thought the fight was about pride, about my family's fence, my land, my rights. But it turned out, it was about something much bigger. A few days later, Mark called again. "You're not gonna believe this," he said. "The state attorney wants you to testify. They're expanding the case to include Sandwell's corporate executives." I drove down to the courthouse the next morning, hat in hand, boots clicking on the marble floor. When I took the stand, the room went silent. The prosecutor walked me through every step, the letters, the fake deeds, the trespassing, and finally, the discovery of the buried drums. When I showed the photos of the rusted lids under my fence line, there was a collective gasp. The defense tried to paint me as a stubborn old rancher holding back progress. But the evidence crushed them. When the environmental officer testified that the contamination could have killed livestock and poisoned the nearby creek, the jury's sympathy turned into outrage. When it was over, the verdict was swift. Sandwell executives were indicted on multiple counts of environmental fraud and bribery. Denise was sentenced to 7 years for her part in the conspiracy. The HOA was permanently dissolved, and Willow Estates went bankrupt. I should have felt triumphant. But standing on that same stretch of land weeks later, watching crews haul out barrel after barrel of poison, all I felt was tired. My father used to tell me, "The land remembers, Jake. It remembers who takes care of it, and who doesn't." Looking at those scars in the earth, I knew he was right. Still, something about it gave me peace. The fence had done its job, it had protected the truth. A year later, the cleanup was finished. The government declared the site safe again. Grass grew where the holes had been, and wildflowers sprouted along the new fence line. I rebuilt that section one final time, stronger, taller, cleaner. On the gate, next to the wooden sign that read, "My land. My blood. My legacy," I added a new plaque, "This fence exposed the truth." Then one morning, I got a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside was a single sentence written in neat handwriting, "Progress doesn't stop, Mr. Carter. Enjoy your peace while it lasts." No signature. No clue who sent it. But I had a feeling the man in the black sedan wasn't gone for good. I folded the letter, tucked it into my jacket, and looked out across my ranch. The sun rose over the fields, painting the fence in gold. Whatever storm came next, I was ready. Because the land, my land, had survived worse. And anyone who came after it again would find out what happens when you mess with a Carter fence. After that anonymous letter arrived, I knew the fight wasn't over, it was just quiet for a while. Silence can be dangerous. It has a way of wrapping around you, making you believe the world's finally calm, when in reality, something darker is crawling toward you. The seasons turned, and for the first time in years, the ranch started to feel alive again. Calves were born that spring, the grass came back thicker and greener, like the land was healing. The northern pasture, the same place where those barrels were buried, had turned into a wildflower field. I didn't plant a single seed, nature did it herself, as if she was reclaiming what had always been hers. I started getting visitors, reporters, activists, even a few environmental students who wanted to learn about how one man had taken down a development empire. I didn't think of it that way, but they did. To me, I just did what needed to be done. Still, their stories spread online, the rancher who fenced off corruption. That headline stuck, and soon, people started calling me the fence man. I didn't hate it. But one afternoon, about 6 months after the trial ended, I saw that black sedan again. Parked half a mile down the dirt road, just out of reach, like a shadow that didn't want to disappear. The driver didn't get out, didn't move, just sat there. I watched for hours, and when the sun dipped below the horizon, he finally drove away. That night, my dog, Rusty, started barking toward the barn. When I went out, I found one of the fences near the east boundary had been cut. The wire hung loose, and tire tracks ran along the dirt. Someone had been here. They hadn't stolen anything, but they wanted me to know they could. I fixed the fence that same night under the glow of my old pickup's headlights. As I tightened the wire, I realized something. Whoever sent that letter wasn't threatening me, they were warning me that the game had changed. They couldn't beat me in court anymore, so they'd try to make me want to give up. I wasn't built that way. I doubled the height of my fences, installed motion cameras, and even put up solar floodlights along the northern edge. Some folks said I was paranoid. I called it being prepared. Then, out of nowhere, a letter from the State Land Division showed up in my mailbox. According to them, my northern property line was under review due to newly discovered survey discrepancies. My hands clenched as I read the rest. The reevaluation was being funded by a private development group, one that had recently purchased the bankrupt assets of Sandwell Development. The name of that company? Progress Holdings LLC. I almost laughed. Progress again. Mark came over that evening when I called him. He took one look at the letter and shook his head. They're trying to rebrand, Jake. Clean slate, new company name, same people, same greed. They won't stop until they own this land, I muttered. He nodded. Then make it impossible for them to want it. Those words stuck in my head all night. Make it impossible for them to want it. The idea took root like a thorn. Over the next month, I started making moves quietly. I worked with a local conservation agency that had been following my story. They offered something called an environmental easement, a legal protection that would permanently classify parts of my ranch as a conservation zone. Once that went through, no one could develop or build on it again, no matter who owned it. It would be protected by state law. The catch? It meant I could never sell or build on those areas either. It would stay wild, forever. It was a hard choice. My father had dreamed of expanding, maybe building cabins one day for travelers. But this fight had shown me something more important. The land wasn't meant to be owned, it was meant to be protected. So I signed the papers. The northern pastures, the creek, the ridge, all officially preserved under my name. If anyone wanted to take it, they'd be fighting the entire state now, not just me. A few weeks later, I got a call from the local newspaper. They wanted to do a feature, From Rancher to Guardian, the man who turned his battle into legacy. I agreed, mostly to make sure the world knew what was really happening. The more light I shined on these people, the less power they had. When that story went live, it spread fast again, this time, even further. Farmers and small landowners from other states started reaching out to me, telling me how they'd been bullied, tricked, or pressured by developers and HOAs. One man from Texas told me he'd watched my story with his teenage son, and it made them put up a new fence around their family ranch, too. That meant more to me than any court win ever could. Still, there was something unsettling about how quiet things got after that. I hadn't seen the black sedan for months. Denise was behind bars, but I couldn't shake the feeling someone else was pulling strings from the shadows. One cold morning, I rode my horse down to the ridge, the one that overlooked both my land and the empty remains of what used to be Willow Estates. All the houses had been torn down after the contamination scandal. What was left was nothing but empty foundations, broken fences, and weeds reclaiming the dirt. It was quiet, but not peaceful. As I sat there, I noticed something strange, a wooden stake with fresh orange tape fluttering in the wind. I dismounted, walked over, and knelt beside it. Written on the tag was, "Survey Marker, Progress Holdings." My jaw tightened. They were still testing the limits. I pulled the stake out of the ground, snapped it in half, and threw it into the creek. Then I turned my horse toward home. 2 days later, an official-looking SUV pulled up to my gate. A man in a gray suit stepped out, clipboard in hand. He introduced himself as a representative from Progress Holdings and said they were conducting soil stability tests for future reclamation plans. I didn't say a word. I just pointed at the sign that hung on my gate, "Private Property, Conservation Land, State Protected." He looked uneasy. "We were told this land was pending release." "It's not pending anything," I said, my voice low. "It's protected. Permanently. And if you or anyone else tries to step foot past this gate again, you'll be facing federal charges for violating a conservation order." He swallowed hard and backed away. Before leaving, he said quietly, "You know they don't stop, right? People like us don't quit because of one piece of paper." I leaned against the gate. "That's fine," I said. "Because people like me don't stop protecting what's ours." He left. And this time, I knew he wasn't coming back. Months rolled by. The land healed. I started planting trees along the old fence lines, not to block anyone out, but to build something lasting. The wind carried the smell of pine and fresh soil. Rusty ran through the fields like a pup again. One morning, I stood by the fence, the same fence that had started it all. The wood was weathered, but strong. Each nail, each plank carried a story, of greed, betrayal, justice, and truth. I ran my hand across the top rail, feeling the grooves worn by years of storms and battles. My reflection stared back at me in the metal plaque I'd nailed there long ago. "This fence exposed the truth." And below it, I added a new line, "and protected it forever." As the sun broke over the hills, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, true peace. Not the kind that comes when the noise stops, but the kind that comes when you know you've done right by the land, by your family, by the truth. The world would keep spinning. Developers would keep scheming. But here, on my ranch, surrounded by the whisper of the wind through the grass and the steady creak of that faithful old fence, I knew one thing for sure: they could take everything else, money, titles, property lines, but they could never take away the legacy of a man who stood his ground. Because this wasn't just a fence. It was a reminder. That one man, with nothing but grit, memory, and faith in the soil beneath his boots, can stand up to greed and win. And as long as my fence stands, so will that truth. Forever.